this Torah study for today, is not part of the regular order of reading that we do during the year. Sorry. Oh, I have to say, I'm Israeli and I'm sitting right now in my apartment in Israel. And I'm sorry, I apologize in advance for my accent, but that's what I have. So I hope everything will be understood and comprehended and that we will have fun together today. Okay, so we are reading actually, today we will be learning about the Torah portion, the part of the Torah that we're reading in today's service for Rosh Hashanah, for the Jewish New Year. Now, if you attended the services either through My Jewish Learning or through any other, Zoom or streaming that you were a part of, you probably noticed that we read today the story about Hagar and Sarah and Hagar, and I will tell you a little bit about that in a second. And tomorrow, when we will be repeating again the services of today, almost to the T, really, it's amazing. We will read a different part of the Torah, the part of the sacrifice of Isaac. So really, together we have this kind of interesting story about the family of Abram, right, of Abraham. And but today we will be really talking about Sarah and Hagar. Okay, so I'll be sharing with you my PowerPoint. Okay, can you see it? Everything is fine? Please nod. I love some nodding. Yeah, thank you, Marcy. And hi. And really, it's something that it's an amazing story, Hagar and Sarah and this entire thing. So what we read today, this morning, actually, in services was chapter 21 in Genesis, and it tells us about the birth of Isaac. And it also continues to tell us that 3 years later, after Isaac was born, Sarah is going to Abraham and telling him, please, I don't want Hagar and her son Ishmael with us anymore. Okay, please send them away. Okay, so it's a very, very difficult chapter emotionally. Okay. So what we're going to try to do today is answer the question, why are we reading this story today, right? It's a celebration today, right? We're supposed to be reading about wonderful things, right? But we're reading about something so dramatic and really difficult and really talks about good and evil and everything, regarding maybe the dark parts of our soul in this story. Okay. So, as I told you, we have here the two stories of Rosh Hashanah, the Hagar in the wilderness, right? She's being sent away, and the sacrifice of Isaac. Okay, so let's talk a little bit just about Hagar, okay? So she enters the biblical narrative in the book of Genesis, chapter 16, and she's actually just a kind of a solution, like very much an object, unfortunately, I have to say, as a solution for the inability of Sarah to have kids, right? So we can see that right here. 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took her slave Hagar, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. And please notice that the Bible is using the word wife and not concubine or any other word, really. And this is something that the sages talk about, the interpreters talk about all the time. Why is she called, Abraham's wife? And it looks like Hagar had a different kind of relationship with Avram, something that isn't so, it's not just, like a maid to his wife, and not just, someone who gave birth to his son. So we know, today when we have the Handmaid's Tale and these stories from a very feminist point of view, it's hard for us to read these stories, of really the way women used to use other women, right? And especially this kind of story. But we have to remember it was a different time, and really we can see that the genius of the Handmaid's Tale is that it was written out of, things throughout history that did happen to women. And that's really an interesting point. So I have to tell you something else that you can see here. I gave you a quote from Genesis 25, which is like further in. And you can see that Abraham, we are told, took another wife whose name was Torah. And you can see here that the interpreters tell us that Torah is Hagar. So after the death of Sarai, Abraham remarries, and we are being told that his second wife was really Hagar. So it's a very, very interesting position that Hagar is put in. Hagar is not just a concubine, she's not just a maid, as you can see in these little stories, in these little interpretations. And I have to tell you that the sages bring in even another level to this story, to this character of Hagar. And look what they're telling us. They are telling us that Hagar came into the lives of Avram and Sarah in a very, very critical moment. If you remember from Genesis, there was a famine in Canaan and in Canaan, and really Avram and Sarai had to go to Egypt. And when they were on their way there, Avram said to Sarai, listen, you are so beautiful, and I'm afraid for my life. Please tell the Egyptians that you are not my wife, but my sister. Okay? And what happened was when they got to Egypt, Pharaoh saw Sarai, right? The word of her beauty got to Pharaoh, the king, and he said, I want her for myself. He paid Avram a lot of money for her, a lot of, he gave him a lot of stock and sheep and all that. And Sarai actually went to live with Pharaoh. Okay? So this is, when we think about it again emotionally, when we try to put ourselves in the shoes of these people, we can see that that emotionally it's really hard to imagine what went over Sarai, how it was for her that her husband, the person she took this amazing journey with, right? This took her away from her land, from her home, and now he's telling her, please pretend not to be my wife. So we are being told that in this very sensitive moment, Hagar walks into their lives. And let's read what the sages tell us, right? So they say, when Pharaoh took Sarah, for the love he loved her, he wrote all his fortune on her ketubah contract. And he wrote his daughter Hagar as her maid. He said, better be my daughter and maid in this house than a landlady in another. So you see, Hagar is not just, we are being told later, maybe the second wife of Avram. She's also a real princess, the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt, right? So it's really amazing to see that Hagar has a lot of levels as a character, and especially, they imagined for her a royal descent, right? So it's really, really interesting to see. So Hagar in the Bible, and also as you can see in the interpretations, is a very interesting and strong character. She fights, but she also breaks, as we will see in a second. And she also talks to God twice in the Bible, which is in the Torah, which is really interesting and pretty rare, you know? And every time we have a character that directly speaks to God, we know we have someone special. So I have to tell you, just to remind you, that Hagar, the first time she was in the desert, she found herself in the desert, was when she ran away from Sarah and Avram's house. And the second time in this chapter that we read this morning, she was sent away. Now let's talk a little bit about Sarah. So in this chapter that we read this morning, she really seems to be a pretty terrible person, right? Doesn't have any compassion for her maid, for her maid's son, the son of her husband. Let's read a little bit, okay? Just this story. So this is, excuse me, this is not from this morning, but from the first time that actually Hagar decided to run away. And Sarai said to Abram, the wrong done me is your fault. I myself put my maid in your bosom. Now that she sees that she is pregnant, I am lowered in her esteem. The Eternal decide between you and me. So here we have Sarai, and she's really mad at Avram. And because she feels that Hagar is, she feels, more than a maid after she gave her to Avram to be, to give a son to Avram. And so Sarai feels that her status in the family is shaken. And she says, I'm mad at Avram, which is, I have to say that their anger is directed in the right direction, right? So she's not just mad at Hagar the first time. And then Avram said to Sarai something that I actually really love. He says, your maid is in your hands. Do to her what's good in your eyes. Deal with her as you think right. When Sarai treated her harshly, then Sarai treated her harshly, and she ran away from her. So we really have here something, actually, the part in bold I translated pretty literally from the Hebrew, because I wanted you to see that it's not just deal with her as you think, right? But that Avram says to her, do to her what's good in your eyes. And I felt that Avram is trying to tell Sarai, please find the good inside yourself, and then, let that be your compass. And I feel like he was really trying to give her a little bit of a pointer towards, a resolution that doesn't include making Hagar miserable. And I think Sarai is, is a pretty sad character, I have to say, in many, many ways. And more than sad, she's really lonely. And I think that moment that I talked to you about, that Avram said to her, tell them you are my sister, not my wife. That moment is something that we see resonating in her life. Okay, so now we have this chapter that we read this morning. Okay, so I'm reading again just so we know the story. So Sarai said to Avram, cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Avram greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Avram, do not be distressed over the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says. Okay, so we have here again, if we're looking for the, the good parts, so we have here a woman that really is trying to protect her son, right? But we see here also a total lack of compassion for what will happen with, the brother of her son and Hagar. But who's also Sarah, right? What else do we know about her that makes her, one of the mothers in Jewish tradition? She is a pretty incredible woman, even though she doesn't come across as a very compassionate one in our chapter. So we have here, first of all, if you remember, both of them, Abram and Sarah, have their names changed. Remember? So we have Abram becomes Abraham, and we have Sarai that turns into Sarah, right? So we have the name change for Abraham, and here in the second part, you can see, and God said to Abraham, as for your wife Sarai, you shall not call her Sarai, but her name shall be Sarah. I will bless her. Indeed, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she shall give rise to nations. Rulers of peoples shall issue from her. As you see, this blessing here, this name change, right, that we have for Abraham, that we have for Jacob, if you remember his dream, and not his dream, but his fight with the man or the angel, and then he's given a name, a second name, Israel, right, not just Jacob. So we have here a moment of transformation. And this moment of transformation is connected to the fact that Sarah and Abraham went through this entire spiritual journey that we usually just, attest to Abraham. They went through it together, the entire thing, the entire Lech Lecha, the entire, go forth and find your way, this entire immigration that they went through. And moving from believing in idols to monotheism, this entire thing was really something that they went through together. And see also what we have here in the last quote. We have a quotation from the sages, interpreters, and we have them saying that Abraham was secondary to Sarah in prophecy. So that means that she was a more important prophetess than Avram, which is amazing to read, right? And the sages do talk about the fact that God spoke also directly to her. So we have here, of course, which is wonderful in the Bible, a complex person, right? We have a person that also deals with becoming a mother in a very, very old age, right? And we have to remember that in the Bible, in that time, a woman's worth was determined only by her ability to have birth, to give sons mostly, and not even daughters, right? So we are talking about a very patriarchal society. And even in this society, when we have a woman that's so special, that has this, spirituality and is a part of this amazing transformation, into monotheism, into thinking about this idea of God very differently, then we know we have a very special person in front of us. Okay, are you with me a little bit? People, yeah? You want to nod? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's go on a little bit. So I have here a quote by the Bible researcher Tikva Primer Knesky, and she's saying something really important. She's saying, lack of power does not unite the powerless. It pits them against each other. And if you think about it, that's exactly what we see here with Hagar and Sarah, right? Because we see two women, okay? When one of them, even maybe a princess, right? When one of them has a little bit more power, we see that she treats Sarai not well. And then we have Sarai using Sarah, we have her using her power to really just get rid of the competition or this threat And that's the only way we see them dealing with each other, right? Even though probably they lived together for many, many years when you think about it, right? So this is really something that's interesting. And I said that when Sarah is mad at Abraham, so that's a really important thing, because this is directed at the person who does have the power and can change the situation, right? And can, decide that his home will be a more ethical place, a better place. And this is kind of the thing with the character of Abraham that we have, is that he's very, very ethical and moral outside, but in his home, many times we see him really not confronting the situation, not dealing with what needs to be dealt and with people's emotions, not just his wives, but we see that also with Isaac, and that's really sad, right? But we have to have the patriarchs. We have to have people who are complex, which is like us. No one is perfect, really. So the thing is that these two women have to find their answer to have like a normal, or like an okay life within this entire situation, right? In their historical context, in the particular home that they live in, right? And I want to say something, a little something about Rosh Hashanah, about this new year. So in the Jewish tradition, this Rosh Hashanah, New Year, is the day of judgment, right? Not Yom Kippur. Most people think that Yom Kippur, a Day of Atonement in 10 days, is Judgment Day in Jewish tradition. But no, it's actually today. And the Day of Atonement is the day of, we can say, like when we appeal, right? Appeal the court. So that's in 10 days. But today our judgment is being given. So we are standing, metaphorically today in services this year in our homes, and we have to make our own account, right? For our own souls, for our own lives. And I have to say that when you kind of quiet down for a little bit, which these 10 days provide to us, a little bit of a quiet down in our lives, then you can see the truth, I believe. That the truth kind of, reveals itself. And the truth, we can see, what kind of person am I? What kind of a woman am I? What kind of man am I? And the answer is always complex, right? It's always, I did good, and I did that, and I was nice to that person, and I contributed my time, and I was empathic, and I was empathetic, but also from, the wrong deeds we did. And we all know when we hurt others. We all know when we hurt ourselves, certain things that we do. And that's what we are asked to do. But in this story of really this triangle of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, there are also two people that are also influenced, which are Isaac and Ishmael, right? These two brothers. And we can see that something is being lost, that fear is running the show, right? That they are really concentrating on what they are fearful of. And Abraham is afraid of Sarah, and Sarah is afraid of Hagar, and Hagar is afraid of both of them, but also afraid of losing her home and losing her son. And everything is really kind of, we can see that when we stand still and look at the emotion, we have people that are really scared. And we have a God, right? When God is saying something right, interfering, God is saying, Abraham, you should listen to your wife. But maybe that's not the right solution here. Maybe this voice, right, that suddenly is being heard is only the voice of the easy solution, right? Do you know this idea of the easy solution? We always have it, right? And maybe Abraham thought, oh, this is the voice of God right now, the voice of the easy solution. But maybe that's not what is really needed here. Maybe Abraham needed a different solution, maybe a harder one that might have made him confront both of them and really make a home for everyone, for his entire family, right? And maybe it's the same for the Torah reading for tomorrow morning, right? Tomorrow morning, we have the sacrifice of Isaac. And maybe when God tells Abraham, Abraham, you need to go and sacrifice your son, maybe the right reaction should have been, no. Maybe it should have been, I have to fail this test in order to succeed in this test. Because the test is maybe I have to see what's right, not what's the easy solution. And maybe the easy solution is not just to obey, right? So I feel like this is a story about losing your path and really not taking time to see what's the right solution and not necessarily the easiest solution. But we have really one heroine that comes out of this. And I think this is Hagar. And that's really, I think, a very interesting character. And we're going to kind of continue to follow her and see what she's doing. So she's also, of course, she's complex. And she's also, the way she treated Sarah is wrong. But we see also that she can find a way. She can find faith inside her, soul. And when she listens to the voice of God, then she uses it to open her eyes, which we will see in a second. And I think Sarah, really tragically, until she dies, pretty soon in the narrative of the Torah, she will still remain very lonely and I think a pretty sad person. So let's see what happens to Hagar once she's out in the wilderness. Early next morning, Abram took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder together with the child and sent her away. And she wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes and went and sat down at the distance, a bow shot away, for she thought, let me not look on as the child dies. And sitting thus far, she burst into tears. God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and let the boy drink. Okay, so you can see that this is really kind of pretty dramatic story, right? And you can see that when we think about why was this chosen for Rosh Hashanah, for this new year? So I can think of another maybe interesting idea, you'll be the judge of that, they don't tell us that the angel brought a well out of nowhere and put it there, right? What do they say? Look at really down here, you can see. Then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water, right? So maybe the well was there all along, right? But because she was so desperate and she was going through this hard time and she was so sad and she was so afraid of what's to come that she was blind to it. She didn't see it, right? And after, when she heard this voice, right, and she remembered, oh, I'm never alone. Even though, this is really the loneliness of motherhood we can see here, right? That you have to take care of someone, and they depend on you, but you don't. You are sometimes hopeless. Sometimes you don't know what to do, right? You're helpless and hopeless. And here she can find. She hears this voice of God, and suddenly, what does she see? She sees a promise of a future for Ishmael, right? Do you see that? And then her eyes are opened, right? So when she finally, found the strength to remember she's never alone, she can see a well full of water, right? We have in Hebrew this expression called Mayim Chaim, which is water for life, right? Water that brings you life, because that's exactly what water is doing. So I have to tell you that in the Islamic tradition, in the Muslim tradition, Hagar or Hajar is a very, very, very important character. And I brought you a little bit of, the story of Hajar as it is told in the Muslim tradition. So let's just read kind of a supplemental story for the story we just read from the Bible. So Abraham was commanded by God to leave Hagar and their baby boy alone in a barren desert with only some dates, a little water, and her fate. Hagar was confused, but accepted her fate when she realized that Abraham was carrying out the will of God. However, survival was difficult in the heat of Arabia, with no oasis in sight. After her food and drink had run out, scripture has it that Hagar started running desperately between two hillocks, close to where the Kaaba is situated, although it was not built at the time, of course, to see if she could spot anyone or any water. She ran 7 times between the hills of Safa and Marwa, urgently hoping and searching for help. After Hajar had completed her 7th frantic dash from hill to hill, a well sprang up from beneath the feet of baby Ishmael. Seeing the gushing water, she rushed back to her baby and started cupping the water, right? Giving it to him, saying zam, zam, which is stop, stop in Arabic, as she did, right? Stop, stop is please stop crying, right? So you can see that we have here a very, very strong woman, a woman that runs, and you see that in this tradition, she is desperate, but she doesn't stop trying, right? She doesn't just sit and cry. She doesn't stop trying to save her baby's life, right? And I have to tell you that later on, as part of the tradition, is that this well, the well of Zamzam, started a settlement in the area. And still, when people are doing their Hajj, which means they are doing their pilgrimage into Mecca, into Saudi Arabia, they are visiting that place and drinking water from that. So really millions of people are drinking water from this well, that is allegedly the well of Hagar. So this is really beautiful. And so in the Quran, in the Islamic tradition, Hagar is a prophetess, really one of the line of prophets that is accounted for in the Quran. So she, like any other prophet, right, brings with her this greatness, this personal greatness, right, this strength, and also a spiritual greatness. And mainly, of course, she's a survivor, but not just a survivor, that took care of herself and her son's life, but also someone who really made something for a lot of other people and made possible their lives in a certain place, right? That's the idea of, we can now, when we have water, we can now, live in a place. So this is really kind of her doing. So we have to see, I think, that this story that we are reading again and again every year, and of course twice a year, because we are reading, of course, the portions also. When we read it on Rosh Hashanah, it's telling us, please notice, when you are looking for spiritual greatness and personal greatness, you need to look maybe not in the places that not in the immediate places, right? Maybe this woman, a single mother, right? This maid, this foreigner, right? In this story, maybe we need to look at her. And please see this wonderful poem by Ayelet Soya that takes this name of Hagar and takes this commandment that we have in Jewish tradition about Hagar, which is the stranger, the foreigner. So she tells us, for you know the feelings of Hagar, the stranger, you too must befriend Hagar, right? This is our obligation, to befriend the stranger, to think what they are feeling and treat them, you know, after we did this empathetic process within ourselves, right? When we try to put ourselves in their shoes. That's the idea of, right? Don't forget that you were slaves in Egypt. But she's telling us, do not pronounce the ger, the stranger, but rather Hagar, right? Do not pronounce Hagar, but Hagar. And you, did you know the feelings of Hagar? Did you love Hagar, right? Like we are commanded to love the stranger. And this idea of we have a woman here that we have an entire story of, and we have more stories about her from our sages, from interpreters, Jewish interpreters throughout the years. How can we use that to love the stranger, the other, and the stranger and the other in us, right? That's part of, I think, the idea in Jewish tradition. And soon we need to close our time together. And I want to close it with a poem that I think is exactly what we need right now. And this is by the poet Murja Kaf, and she's imagining how can we make sure that there is peace between Sarah and Hagar. What can they see? What kind of other options are available to them in a world that doesn't imagine them as enemies, right? Look at the way she opens this poem, right? Dear Sarah, life made us enemies, right? But she's trying to find another way into this. And I have to tell you that I love the, you know, the title of the poem, right? Hagar writes, you know, a letter, just I can't see anything beneath what's going on here in Zoom, to Sarah as an exercise suggested by her therapist, right? So this is really wonderful, and I bet many of us wrote these kinds of letters, right, as ordered by our therapist. So really, it's about imagining something else. And like I said before, right, these women were living their lives in a very set history, in a very set context. But here we can imagine different things, and of course, we can imagine different life of solidarity that's so needed right now, right, through these pandemic times, life of peace, life of trying to see, you know, what in us is like other people and not unlike other people. So let's read this wonderful poem. Dear Sarah, life made us enemies, but it doesn't have to be that way. What if we both ditched the old man? He could have visitation rights with the boys, alternate weekends and holidays. Yeah, especially that feast of the sacrifice everybody has forgotten anyway. That it began with me, abandoned in the desert, watching my baby dehydrate for days. I dared God to let us die. Anyway, you and I, we'd set up house, raise the kids, start a catering business maybe. You have brains, so do I. We could travel. There are places to see besides Ur and this Nowheresville desert with its tribes of hooligans. No, your lips always thin when you disapprove, like the mother I can hardly remember from before I wound up in your house. I was barely more than a girl. You are the one who brought me there from Egypt. You used to laugh back then. In those days, you could bear to look at me. Oh, Sarah, you need years of therapy. Can't you admit that what he did to me was cruel? Admit it for just 1 second. It won't make you hate him forever. Just long enough to know the world won't fall apart. The world won't fall apart. Just long enough to pity him, to find yourself. Laugh, Sarah. Breathe. Imagine. God the possibilities. Sincerely love, Hagar. So I wish us really a year in which we will imagine different possibilities for ourselves, for our beloved narratives, and really to find peace within each other with each other and within ourselves. So thank you very much and Shana Tova.